A quilt is a puzzle made of cloth, squares of red and white gingham, solid rectangles, print ones too, dotted triangles, and a few plaids mixed in, flowered circles and long, narrow strips spread out on the floor. Next comes the puzzling, mixin' and matchin' colors, shapes, and patterns, finding combinations of pieces that fit like a puzzle, making it a picture, telling a story.
Meet China and Mary Ann Petway. Though not related, they're direct descendants of slaves brought to Gee's Bend, Alabama in the 19th century. No bigger than 3 square miles, and at last census, fewer than 300 people. No roads or stores, just a post office. But this isolation was no hedge against history's grasp. From the quake of emancipation to the trauma of having their soul ferry burned as punishment for attempting to vote. Their story is one of resilience, faith, and creativity.
A lot of these quilts that are hung here are made out of old clothing, out of old jean, corduroy, whatever the ladies got a hand on to at the time.
I make a quilt by this side, and I say, oh, I don't like this. I cut, and I take loose until it get to suit me.
When I was 12, I made my first quilt. Quilting was always around us, because back then in Gee's Bend it was really cold, and so it was something that was done because we needed it.
I get my design from my mind. I be sitting there thinking about how I wanted to make a quilt, and then it just come in my head how I wanted to make it. I piece it with the machine, and then when I get ready to quilt it, I get the lining and the batting.
That's good. Roll this up first. Come on, Minister.
And that you would put into frames. You get a chance to see a quilt frame that we use, and workhorses that carpenter used to build on, and we use them as quilting frame. We call them our quilting horses. And we put them in the frame, and that's how we quilt. There's 3 layers to a quilt, and you would have to quilt all those layers by hand.
Somebody knocking at your door.
Taking a few basic designs, they run with them, and they've made them their own and are able to create infinite variety from just, a few basic shapes.
Nothing wasted. Grandma wants me to learn to quilt using the old ways, all by hand. Nothing wasted. Her nut brown hands gently unravel the stitches from the hem of an old red and white gingham dress, stitch by stitch. Slowly, she backs out of the dress, taking apart what she'd put together long ago. Snip, snip, pull. The thread is gone. The dress falls apart. A puddle of red and white gingham on the floor. Now I know a patch of Grandma's old dress will be the heart of my quilt. Good morning. So I am going to show you how to create a quilt square inspired by the quilts of Gee's Bend that we just learned about. So you are going to have in your folder 1 square piece of paper, and this is going to be your base, and then 3 smaller rectangles of paper that you can use to cut your pieces from. So this is going to be your fabric for your quilt. So our first step is going to be drawing some geometric shapes. So Remember many of the geometric shapes that we have studied. So I'm going to show you some tricks on how to draw some, and then you'll be able to cut them out for your quilt. Okay, so I'm going to draw one vertical line on my paper. So now I have some rectangles, but I'm going to make some triangles. So I'm going to use that line, and I'm going to draw a zigzag line across my paper. So now I have a bunch of triangles I can use for my quilt. So I am going to go ahead and cut these out. So now I've got my triangles, bunch of triangles here. Okay, I'm just gonna set those aside for a moment. Okay, next up I wanna make some rectangles. Okay, and I'm gonna do this just by drawing vertical lines on my paper. So. So now I've got some vertical lines to cut, and this is going to give me some rectangles for my quilt. So now I have some rectangles to use in my quilt. Next up, I want to draw some squares. Okay. So I encourage you to maybe grab a crayon or something else you can use to measure, maybe an eraser or a sharpener. Okay. So I know I'm going to do a line down here because a square has 4 equal sides. So I'm just using that to mark. So I can get some squares that are pretty even. You could also use you could definitely use a ruler if you guys have one, or 2 marks on your desk. All right, so now I've got some squares, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut those out. And they aren't perfect, but they don't need to be. Okay, if you notice in the Geese Bend quilt, they're trying to use every little scrap of fabric. Okay, so now I have my 4 squares. All right, last shape I'm gonna do is a rhombus. Remember when we were drawing, we did those 2 triangles on top of each other. So I've got my line here. I'm gonna do a couple of yellow. And then I also want to do an orange one. Maybe a little bit bigger. So it's up to you, like how many shapes you want to use. And mine is getting a little off center here. So I'm just gonna use that to recenter. There we go. All right, now cut out your rhombuses. And the nice thing about these is I can use this triangle in between my two rhombuses if I want. Okay, so now I have a bunch of geometric shapes. And I am gonna start figuring out how I want to arrange them on my quilt square. So I'm gonna lay out a few ideas here before I glue, because I might need, more of something. Like I'm kind of liking how this is going, so maybe I'm gonna cut another rectangle here. So you can play around with how you wanna make your quilt square with your geometric shapes. Okay. And I'm gonna move this in a little bit. So I haven't glued anything yet, but I am liking this composition. So now I am going to start gluing it in place. Now that I found a composition that I like. Notice I cut a whole bunch more shapes that I'm not going to use, which is okay. One more thing, yours should not look like mine. I'm gonna give a few different examples of how you can rearrange your shapes. So we could, you could do this. Or it could look like this. Or it could look like this. It's up to you. Be creative. Okay. All right, so first thing I want to tell you. So you drew with pencil on one side and then you cut it out. Put the glue on the side that you drew on, okay? You don't want those pencil lines to show. So put the glue on the side that you drew your cutting lines on. Okay, so again, glue on the pencil side. It will just make for a nice, neat artwork in the end. So again, I'm putting the glue on the side that I drew with my pencil. So I cannot see the pencil when I flip it over. Also, don't pump up your glue a bunch. You only need it up a tiny, tiny bit. Okay, so again, very important because I did a lot of drawing on the back of this piece. I want to put the glue on the side with the pencil. So I'm covering it with glue and then flipping it over so I can't see those pencil marks. All right, pressing, pressing, pressing. All right, so I have the basics down. If you have a little extra time and you want to add a little bit more, you could cut some smaller shapes out and add them over top of some of the larger shapes. So you can get creative and add a few small shapes on top of your larger shapes and give this quilt square an interesting look. When you are all done, flip it over, put your name on there. Your first name, last initial. I'm just gonna put my last name on mine. Okay, then put it back in your folder along with any leftover paper because I can use it again. Just like this, and put it back in your folder to hand in.